It's October the 30th, and today we're looking at sweet chestnut. Okay, well we've got a sweet chestnut here, just to show you what it looks like. It's got these serrated leaves, and it has these flower spikes on. This one's a bit old now, but yeah, they come out earlier in the summer. And then the actual chestnuts are encased in these spiky seed casings. And I don't know if you can see, but there's usually several nuts in each case, and there's usually one decent one. Yeah, there's a nice big one in there, and the other two not so big. And as you can see, it's quite a sizable tree. I mean, this one's actually been coppiced, but yeah, they can get really quite big sweet chestnuts, and yeah, pretty much as big as any tree you'll find in the UK. And yeah, as you can see, when they're left uncoppiced, they get pretty big chestnut trees. This one's actually got a tree house built around it. But yeah, the bark's quite nice. It forms this kind of lattice kind of effect on it when it gets mature, and you get this kind of netted appearance to the trunks. The inner growing layer of the bark is called the liber. This is made up of tiny wavy fibres that, in the case of sweet chestnut, connect at regular intervals where they touch. The bark is smooth when the tree is young, but as it ages, old bark is pushed outwards and slowly expands, becoming more and more furrowed and eventually reflecting the mesh-like structure of the liber layer. And you'll quite often see old coppiced sweet chestnuts like this, as well as newly coppiced ones as well. They're still coppiced now, but they used to be a really important crop in this country for quite a long time, and they're actually brought here by the Romans, who pretty much planted them all over their empire wherever they'd grow, because they valued them so much. In the 1st century, Pliny the Elder described in his Historia Naturalis 18 different cultivars of sweet chestnut known to the Romans. And there's a really nice old coppiced tree here. You can see it's quite a sizable tree. And yeah, this one, and there's my hand to give you an idea of the size. I guess it hasn't been coppiced for at least 100 years. So who knows how old this tree is. It may have been coppiced many times before. It's on a boundary bank, so it probably has been coppiced many times before. And you can see there's more of them along the bank as well. Yeah, they can get pretty old, sweet chestnuts. There's some which are believed to be a couple of thousand years old. Not so many in Britain, because they've only been here about 2,000 years since the Romans brought them here. And yeah, the Romans valued it, well, firstly for its wood, which it's not that useful when it's very young, but as soon as it gets to any size, it's really durable. It's full of natural tannins, so it's resistant to rotting, and it's still used in fence posts and things like that today. But it used to be used for all kinds of uses that you'd use wood for, and yeah, by the Middle Ages it was a very valuable crop, and some landowners made quite a lot of money through their ownership of chestnut coppices. Still widely used today, chestnut grows quite quickly from coppice stalks. Its straight-grained poles are easy to split, and they're most useful between 10 and 50 years old, after which the grain becomes more twisted and the wood is of less use. And another commercial use that sweet chestnut used to have as well was hiring for the right of pannage, which is grazing pigs in woodlands. And they used to charge people to let their pigs forage for chestnuts, and this largely used to happen in Britain, where for some reason we've never really valued sweet chestnuts as a human food source. Although a possible reason for that is in Britain the chestnuts we get off our trees aren't quite as large as the ones you'll find in Mediterranean countries where the tree originates from. So perhaps that's why they were less valued here. Now, aside from the nuts, which I'll get to in a second, there is a medicinal use for the leaves, probably again due to its high tannin content.
An infusion made from the leaves has been used as a gargle to treat coughs, as well as a poultice to treat rheumatism, stiff joints and even burns. An infusion of the leaves and the fruit husks can also be used to make a shampoo.
Now at this time of year, there's so many chestnuts falling on the ground, there's too many to gather. They're just everywhere, absolutely everywhere. In a coppice like this, there's just, well, I mean, the leaf litter on the floor is just absolutely full of chestnuts. You'd have a horrible time walking in bare feet round here. And of course the Romans valued the nuts as well as the wood, and it was quite an important food source for them, and probably another good reason why they planted so many sweet chestnut trees right the way across Europe. And one of the unusual things with sweet chestnuts compared to many other tree nuts is, rather than containing a lot of protein like hazelnuts or beech nuts would, they've got a lot of carbohydrate in them, and they're a really good source of carbohydrate.
They also contain potassium and vitamin A, as well as vitamin C, but some of this will be lost during the cooking process.
You can eat sweet chestnuts raw, that's really not a problem at all, but they do have a kind of bitter pith on them, and I prefer to cook them myself. They kind of get a bit sweeter and a bit less dry when you cook them, and if you boil them before roasting them, then the pith tends to separate away with the shell rather than sticking to the actual flesh of the nut.
It's best to make a split in the shell before roasting to avoid them exploding in the oven. Traditionally, chestnuts were preserved by drying either as flour or whole peeled nuts. They can also be boiled, peeled and frozen for roasting at a later date.
And of course it's also quite important to distinguish them from horse chestnuts, which not only taste disgusting but they're also poisonous, so don't eat those.
Although they look similar, sweet chestnuts and horse chestnuts are from completely different families. The horse chestnut has more rounded leaf tips, has fewer and sturdier spines on the seed cases, and more spherical chestnuts with no tapering end.
And also it's a possibility that you might be able to eat the pollen from the flower spikes. I've never tried this myself. There's always a risk of allergic reaction when eating dense proteins like pollen. But yeah, in the early summer when the flower spikes are on the trees, I mean, you can see just clouds of pollen coming off them when the wind blows, and I imagine it'd be quite easy to gather that.
Sweet chestnuts were once a staple food in areas where wheat could not be grown. Although the tree fruits more erratically in colder northern regions, it was still greatly valued there too. In southern England it was known as the woodsman's tree because the timber could be used for almost any purpose. So what did the Romans ever do for us? Well, they brought us the versatile sweet chestnut tree.